I'm the location scout for cell phone towers. What I discovered on top of the mountain is beyond terrifying. It's a huge paradox. Rural areas with almost no population still require cell towers to be installed on them to get dependable coverage out to the urban population centers. I was hired by a major wireless carrier to scout potential installation sites because of my interest in hiking the mountains and for my knowledge of the local area. It doesn't hurt either that I have a four-wheel drive pickup and can follow a GPS signal in the wilderness. When I first got the job, I was elated. Not many people have an opportunity to explore the woods and make some money doing it. My employer is actually an aerial antenna contractor for the cell company who installs the towers for their telecommunications infrastructure to work. They're very specific about the requirements. It doesn't have to be on the highest peak around, but ideally the best spots are locations where there's a high clearance on all sides and accessible to maintenance. It doesn't matter how great the view is if it requires going across a swamp or sheer cliffs to get to it. The installation and maintenance vehicles need a reasonably passable track to get to the site to do their jobs. That's where I come in. They give me coordinates that would benefit from new towers. Then I scout the back roads and deer paths up the ridgeline and around the target area for promising locations. Most of them don't pan out. If there's a logging road near the top, it's an ideal situation, but more often than not, I end up making my own road through dense thickets and up perilous cliffsides. It's dangerous work, there's no doubt about it. As a matter of fact, more than once I've had to call a buddy of mine to drag me out of deep ravines with his tow truck, but nothing compares to what I discovered last Wednesday. Up near the top of the mountain range I was scouting, I spotted a crude lean-to hidden in a hilly recess. It was hard to recognize, and I might have mistaken it for a naturally occurring pile of brush and tree limbs, but it bore the unmistakable signs of being crafted by something. To say it was rustic would be generous, but this hastily constructed shack in the wilderness had definite signs of being lived in. Being at least 3 miles from the nearest passable mountain trail meant that its occupants had a strong preference for solitude. That made me approach it with a deep abundance of caution. I certainly didn't want to startle or anger some shotgun-toting hermit living off the grid. If only that was the case. I crouched behind a nearby oak to curiously spy on the cabin's unknown occupants. The hair on the back of my neck sprang out like it was electrified at the chilling vision my eyes witnessed. It wasn't hermits living there. They weren't even human. In what I could only describe as a feral clan of carnivorous forest creatures, they were living their lives, thankfully unaware of my nearby presence. If you crossed a full-grown grizzly with a large timber wolf, you might begin to appreciate the nightmare fuel species of a creature occupying this hidden mountain shack. They stood semi-erect and snarled menacingly at each other in a fierce tongue only they understood. It might have been fascinating to observe the fanged show of dominance on a nature program in the safety of my living room, but not nearly as much 40 yards away in the low scrub brush off the ridgeline. I was terrified to draw attention to myself. There was no way I could outrun those rabid-looking abominations, and my modest hunting knife wasn't going to save me either if they attacked. I feared they'd get a whiff of my scent as the cool mountain air whipped past me and blew towards them. That would spell the end of me. I was sure of that. From my crouched position, I couldn't wrap my head around how lumbering beasts could construct a human-like shelter, but they obviously had. It was definitely theirs. I would have expected them to be burrowed in a primal den or cave somewhere, but they were fully within their element inside this hidden lodge. It was fascinating watching them interact with each other. Whatever they actually were, they possessed at least rudimentary understanding of construction and tool use, which ordinary animals do not have. Having such undeniable evidence of higher intelligence, paired with seeing these gangly, unnatural creatures living so close to humanity, turned my blood to ice. They didn't get the size or intellectual development from eating berries and grass. I was pretty sure of that. They had prominent, sharpened canines, and I was intimately aware that I was made out of meat. I had to get my ass out of there as inconspicuously as possible and hightail it down the mountain pronto. This surely wasn't the world's entire population of their unknown species, all sequestered in that ridgeline shack. There had to be more of them, and I needed to warn the rest of the world before we became sitting ducks. Not being able to outrun them, I had to bide my time. It's a miracle I didn't attract notice when I came upon their lair. It's not like I was trying to sneak up on an unknown species of cabin-building ferocious wolf bears. Only because they appeared to be fighting amongst themselves had I remained unnoticed, and that could change at any moment. Assuming they had the same acute sense of smell, hearing, and sight as the apex predators they roughly resembled, I was in serious trouble. Being a hero was the last thing on my mind. I just hoped to wait it out and eventually escape. Nearing dusk, my heart sank as the situation descended from dire to even worse. Most of them left the shack in different directions to do whatever wolf bears are apt to do. Yes, they shit in the woods, and why wouldn't they? Even unnatural wilderness creatures have to answer the call of nature. Yes, they poop in the woods, and why wouldn't they? Even unnatural wilderness creatures have to answer the call of nature. Now, I had them spread about in unknown locations I couldn't track visually anymore. My narrowing opportunities for escape were cut off. Beforehand, they were all together where I could see them. I wanted to kick myself for waiting too long to make my move. They were probably out hunting, and any direction I fled would mean I'd become the night's fresh kill. My mind raced. How could I avoid detection and get back to my truck? I didn't dare move a muscle, fearing even the slightest change in my uncomfortable stance would call their attention. My legs began to cramp. I desperately needed to pee too, but I wasn't about to send out a smellogram to the vicious predators I was hiding from. Just then my cell phone started buzzing in my pocket like a dang dinner bell. It was probably just my supervisor wondering about my progress in the woods, but it couldn't have come at a worse time. In the stillness of the quiet mountain air, it seemed like an eternity before I could find the mute switch in my pocket. I'll admit, I did tickle myself a little bit. It seemed as loud as a car alarm under the circumstances. Unbelievably, I wasn't pounced on and devoured for my technological misfortune. It was probably one of the few good things about most of the creatures being elsewhere. They were out of range to hear it, I guess. Had the call come in before they left, I would have been dead meat, quite literally. Now I had to compose myself and figure out a real plan. How could I escape the attention of half a dozen horse-sized apex carnivores with superior senses, scattered to unknown parts of the woods? I had to devise some route which they couldn't take. While technically right, inventing such an unlikely escape seemed even more impossible than just skipping down the hillside like an unconcerned schoolgirl. Neither idea seemed possible. Then I remembered I had 200 feet of rope in my backpack. If I could get to a tree by the ridgeline and secure my rope, I could climb down one of the sheer rock faces and hopefully put some distance between myself and these unholy monsters. Did I mention I'm scared of heights? Yeah, that was going to be a serious obstacle. That's why I don't work for the tower construction team. They make big money, but they don't fear death the way you or I do. They scale those flimsy aerial antennas with no concern for their mortal lives and keep on climbing upward like lunatics. I'm able to peer off a cliff if I'm a few feet from the edge and enjoying the view, but scaling down the side of the rocky face without protective gear is a big old nope for me. At least ordinarily, but faced with being eaten by snarling wolf bears, I decided to seek the courage. I'd rather plummet to my death than be eaten. At least my broken body would still exist there at the base of the canyon. And thus began my own person rescue out of certain peril. I crept away with painfully slow progress. I eyed the den mother and their shack religiously as I backed up, inch by inch. Finally, I put enough distance between her and I that I felt safe heading towards the cliff edge. I cursed myself for not packing my rope in better condition. It was wadded up and had several knots, which I didn't feel I had the luxury of time to smooth out. But I also didn't want to be 20 feet from a safety ledge with them possibly nearby. I made the time, all while I was terrified of one of the alpha males spotting me by the clearing and dragging my kicking carcass back to their lair. I picked the most secure tree I could find and cast the rope down the side. I disappeared over the edge in the realm of nightmarish acrophobia. I'd never been rappelling, nor did I have the proper equipment or training, but extreme circumstances push a person to do exceptional things to save their lives. I'd watched footage of others and remembered a technique of looping the rope under the thighs and gradually easing the other side through the hand. It was far harder than it looked on television, but with the exception of a few rope burns and uncontrolled slips, I managed to make it work. No matter what, this was definitely a path which none of them had taken. I tried not to look down, but I had no other way of knowing if I'd reached the end of the rope and still suspended 1,000 feet above terra firma. I proudly suppressed another urge to scream. Luckily, there was a cliff ledge about 2/3 of the length of the rope, and I felt some sense of relief. From there, I scaled a series of narrow footholds until I could make it back to the interior of the forest. As darkness approached, I didn't want to be caught halfway down the mountain, so I picked up my pace, even with the risk of attracting their attention. Hopefully, they'd already found another meal and were back home consuming it. I didn't rest until my key was in the ignition. I locked the doors and tore out of there. Frankly, I didn't breathe normally again until I'd bolted my front door more than 20 miles away. My supervisor called again in a huff. He was upset I hadn't answered before and was anxious for my report of the suitability of the mountain site for potential antenna construction. There was no way I was going to tell him the truth. He'd never believe me, and frankly, who would without seeing those things for themselves? Instead, he would fire me and send someone else there to get a second opinion. I wouldn't want their blood on my hands. I did my best to explain why it was definitely a no-go for a tower under any circumstances. I used the absolute best excuses I had. Let's hope he takes my word for it. All we need is for these abominable things to get a taste of human flesh and then settle down here to hunt in the valley. It would be a bloodbath. The best thing for all involved is for them to remain isolated up there in the wilderness, far, far away from mankind. Remember that the next time you complain about having only 2 bars. We don't need better cell reception that badly.